There's something nobody really talks about. Not at the doctor, not with your closest friends, definitely not at work. It sits right there, in the space between you and every other person you've ever spoken to face, and most of the time, you don't even know it's there until you catch a glimpse of it in someone else's eyes. A split second. A barely perceptible lean backward. A hand that moves just slightly toward the nose. And in that moment, something inside you sinks. You've brushed. You've flossed. You've used the mouthwash. Sometimes twice a day. Sometimes 3 times. You've chewed the gum. You've avoided the garlic. Skipped the coffee. Turned down the onions. You've done everything the commercials told you to do, everything your dentist reminded you of at your last checkup. And still, something isn't right. The confidence that should come with clean teeth and fresh breath just isn't there. And you can't explain why. This video is about that feeling. That persistent, quiet frustration. That invisible problem that doesn't respond to the solutions everyone says should work. Because what most people don't realize, what almost nobody talks about, is that when bad breath keeps coming back no matter what you do, it's not a hygiene problem anymore. It never really was. It's something much more complex. It's something alive. Let's start from the beginning. Right now, inside your mouth, there are more microorganisms living and interacting than there are people on Earth. We're not talking about dozens or hundreds. We're talking about hundreds of billions of bacteria, over 700 different species identified so far, coexisting in a dynamic, constantly shifting biological environment. Your mouth is not just a gateway for food. It is a living ecosystem, a rainforest in miniature, a community with its own politics, its own alliances, its own wars. And like any ecosystem, it doesn't just need to be clean, it needs to be balanced. Think about what happens when a rainforest loses its balance, when one species of plant takes over, when the predators disappear, when the soil loses its natural richness. The whole system starts to collapse. What was once lush and diverse becomes monotone and unhealthy. What was once teeming with life becomes a breeding ground for the wrong kinds of growth. Your mouth works exactly the same way. When the bacterial balance inside your oral cavity is healthy, when the right species of bacteria are thriving, when the pH is where it should be, when saliva is flowing properly, when the tissues are well oxygenated, you don't have a bad breath problem. The system manages itself. The beneficial bacteria outcompete the harmful ones. Waste compounds get processed and neutralized before they can cause damage or generate odor. But when something disrupts that balance, and this is where it gets interesting because the disruptors are often things we'd never think to blame, the entire system starts to shift. Slowly at first, subtly, in ways that are easy to dismiss or rationalize. But the shift is real, and it's progressive, and it doesn't stop on its own. This is the part that changes everything when you truly understand it. Bad breath is not a symptom of dirtiness. It is a symptom of imbalance. And those two things require completely different solutions. When most people hear bacteria in the mouth, they think of decay. They think of cavities. They think of plaque. They reach for the antibacterial mouthwash, the bacteria-killing toothpaste, the tongue scraper. The instinct is to eliminate, to sterilize, to kill. And that instinct, completely understandable as it is actually one of the biggest reasons the problem persists. Here's what's happening at a level most people never see. There are 2 main categories of bacteria in your mouth, and they are locked in a constant, invisible competition for territory, resources, and survival. The first category is the beneficial bacteria, the ones that belong there, that help regulate pH, that support gum health, that produce natural compounds that neutralize harmful ones, that keep the environment oxygen-rich and inhospitable to the bad actors. The second category is the anaerobic bacteria, the ones that thrive in low oxygen environments, that feed on the proteins in the tissues and the food debris you can't fully reach, and that produce as a byproduct a group of compounds called volatile sulfur compounds, or VSCs. You know these compounds by their effects. The rotten egg smell, the sulfuric edge that hits the back of the throat, the bitter, almost metallic taste that appears in the morning and won't fully go away. These are VSCs. They are the direct cause of bad breath. Not general dirtiness, not poor brushing technique, but the metabolic waste products of specific anaerobic bacteria that have been allowed to multiply beyond their natural proportion in the oral ecosystem. And here's the critical thing. When you use an antibacterial mouthwash, you don't selectively kill only the bad bacteria. You kill everything, the good ones and the bad ones equally. In the short term, you get a brief reset, which is why it seems to work for a few hours. But in the medium and long term, you've created a vacuum. And in biology, vacuums don't stay empty for long. The question is, which bacteria repopulate first? The anaerobic, odor-producing bacteria are resilient. They've been adapting to hostile conditions for millions of years. They have biofilm structures, the technical name for what we call plaque, that protect them from mechanical removal and chemical attack. They multiply faster under stress, and in the absence of their competitors, they don't just come back, they dominate. This is the cycle. This is why it feels like nothing ever fully works. Because it doesn't. Not when the approach is elimination without restoration. One of the most important things I want you to understand today is that this isn't a binary problem. Either you have bad breath or you don't. This is a progressive condition that develops through recognizable stages, and understanding those stages is what creates the real shift in awareness, because once you can see where you are in the progression, you can understand exactly what's happening inside your body and why it feels the way it does. Stage 1. The early imbalance. This is the stage most people never recognize as a problem at all. The bacterial balance has begun to shift, but the shift is small enough that the body's natural compensatory mechanisms can still partially manage it. You might notice that your breath isn't quite as fresh as it used to be in the morning, but you attribute it to sleep. You might notice a faint taste that wasn't there before, but you assume it's something you ate. You might find that your gum tissue feels slightly more sensitive when you brush, but you conclude that you press too hard. None of these things in isolation seem alarming. That's exactly the problem. Because at stage 1, the ecosystem is still fighting back. The beneficial bacteria haven't been fully displaced yet, but the conditions are changing. The pH is shifting. The anaerobic bacteria are gaining ground. The biofilm is getting denser in the hard-to-reach areas. The system is under stress, and it's starting to show. Most people ignore stage 1 for months, sometimes years. Stage 2, entrenchment. This is the stage where the problem becomes more noticeable. But paradoxically, it's also the stage where denial is at its strongest. By stage 2, the anaerobic bacteria have established a genuine foothold. The biofilm has thickened. The VSE production is consistent enough that other people may begin to notice before you do, because our own olfactory systems are remarkably good at adapting to the smells we live with constantly. At stage 2, the morning breath is more intense and takes longer to dissipate. The bitter or metallic taste in the mouth is more persistent. You might notice that your gum tissue bleeds more easily when you floss, not because you're flossing wrong, but because the inflammation caused by the bacterial imbalance has made the tissues more vulnerable. You might find that your breath returns within an hour or two of brushing, no matter how thoroughly you've brushed. This is the stage where many people begin the cycle of escalating interventions. Stronger mouthwash, more frequent brushing, specialty toothpastes, dental chewing gums, tongue scrapers used multiple times a day, and some of these things provide temporary relief. But none of them address the underlying imbalance, which means the relief is always temporary, and the return of symptoms is always inevitable. The frustration that builds at stage 2 is real and understandable. You are working hard to solve a problem, and the problem keeps coming back, and you don't understand why. And that gap between effort and result creates a specific kind of demoralization that is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. Stage 3, the deceptive normal. This is the stage I want to spend the most time on because it is the most dangerous, and it is the one that almost nobody talks about. By stage 3, something subtle but profound has happened. Your body has adapted. The inflammatory response that was acute and painful in stage 2 has become chronic and low-grade. The bacterial imbalance has become the new norm. Your immune system is no longer mounting an aggressive response because it's been in a state of sustained low-level activation for so long that it's essentially recalibrated around the dysfunction. And here's what makes this stage so deceptive. Many of the acute symptoms seem to stabilize. The gum bleeding might actually become less frequent, not because the situation has improved, but because the tissue has changed in response to sustained inflammation, becoming less sensitive and less responsive. The taste sensation in your mouth has become so familiar that your brain has stopped flagging it as anomalous. Your morning routine has incorporated so many compensatory behaviors, the specific sequence of brushing, the mouthwash, the breath check ritual before meetings, that you've built an entire daily architecture around managing something you've quietly accepted as permanent. You think you've found a way to live with it. What you've actually done is normalize the dysfunction and stop looking for the real solution. This is the moment of identification I want to create for you. Think about your own routines right now. Think about the things you do every morning before you leave the house. Think about whether any of those behaviors are responses to something you've accepted as just how your breath is, just how your mouth feels, just how things are for you. Because if they are, you may be living in stage 3, and you may have been there for much longer than you realize. If what I've just described sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in that pattern of persistent bad breath, the bitter taste that won't go away, or the social anxiety that comes from never quite trusting your own breath, There is a guide in the first link in the description and in the pinned comment below this video that was specifically designed for this situation. It addresses how to interrupt this cycle before it moves further, and it's for people who have already tried the standard approaches and found them wanting. Check it out. The link is right there. Let's step back from the mouth for a moment because there's a larger story happening here, one that connects the oral ecosystem to the health of the entire body in ways that science is only now beginning to fully articulate, but that your body has been trying to communicate for a long time. The mouth is not a separate, isolated chamber. It is the entry point to your entire digestive system. It is connected through tissue and through the microbial pathways that travel with swallowed saliva and bacteria to your throat, your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines. The bacteria that populate your oral cavity are in constant communication with the bacteria that populate your gut. And the relationship between oral health and systemic health, meaning the health of the rest of your body, is one of the most active areas of biomedical research today. What researchers have found, repeatedly and across multiple studies, is that the imbalances that show up in the mouth are rarely happening in isolation. They are almost always accompanied by, or preceding, imbalances in other parts of the system. Think about the symptoms that often accompany persistent bad breath in people who have been struggling with it for years. There's the digestive fatigue, the feeling that your stomach is slow, that digestion takes longer than it should, that you feel bloated or uncomfortable after meals that shouldn't cause that kind of reaction. This isn't a coincidence. The anaerobic bacteria that have overpopulated your oral cavity swallow their way into your digestive tract with every sip of water, every meal, every moment of unconscious swallowing throughout the day. They disturb the gut microbiome in much the same way they've disturbed the oral microbiome, competing with beneficial species, altering the environment, changing the chemistry. There's the recurring inflammation, the slight puffiness in the gums that you've come to accept as just how your gums are, the occasional sore throats that appear without obvious cause and resolve on their own, the general sense of facial heaviness or pressure that you might have attributed to allergies or stress. These are inflammatory responses, your immune system attempting to contain a bacterial population that has grown beyond its natural territory. There's what I can only describe as a kind of systemic fogginess, a baseline fatigue that doesn't fully respond to sleep, a subtle reduction in cognitive sharpness, a feeling of being slightly less than fully well without being specifically sick. The research connecting chronic low-grade oral infection and inflammation to systemic inflammatory markers is compelling and growing. Your immune system is extraordinarily efficient, but it has a finite capacity. When it's perpetually occupied managing a chronic oral imbalance, that capacity is reduced everywhere else. And then there's the social dimension, which is in many ways the most painful dimension of all, because human beings are social animals, and the quality of our social connections depends in no small part on our ability to engage without anxiety. When you cannot trust your own breath, you modify your behavior in ways that are often unconscious but always costly. You speak more quietly, you maintain more physical distance, you avoid certain conversations, certain settings, certain people. You hold back in professional situations where your voice and your confidence should be fully present. The compound effect of these modifications over months and years of living with this problem is a kind of quiet contraction of your world, not dramatic, not obvious, but real. And it's a cost that no amount of mouthwash can address, because it isn't really about the breath anymore. It's about the confidence that the breath has taken from you. Here is the part of this conversation that I think matters most for anyone who has been living with this problem for a significant amount of time. The human body is, under the right conditions, an extraordinary self-correcting system. It is built with multiple layers of redundancy, backup mechanisms, fail-safes, compensatory pathways that are designed to maintain equilibrium even when the system is under stress. In a healthy oral ecosystem, even when bad bacteria gain a temporary advantage due to illness or antibiotic use or dietary changes, the beneficial bacterial population has the capacity to rebound. The system has enough resilience to restore balance on its own, but there is a threshold. There is a point beyond which the system has been compromised long enough, deeply enough, that self-correction is no longer possible without intervention. The beneficial bacteria have been reduced to numbers too small to effectively compete. The biofilm structures that protect the harmful bacteria have become too established to be disrupted by normal brushing and washing. The pH and oxygen levels in the oral environment have been altered so consistently that the conditions now actively favor the anaerobic bacteria over the beneficial species. Past this point, the body is no longer fighting to restore balance. It is managing dysfunction. And managing dysfunction is not the same as healing. It is simply the body doing its best to survive in a compromised environment, conserving resources, adapting to the new reality, and continuing to send signals that something is wrong even as those signals become background noise. The signals it sends are the ones you already know. The persistent breath that doesn't respond to treatment, the ongoing gum sensitivity, the recurring taste disturbances, the digestive irregularities, the fatigue. These are not random symptoms. They are a coherent message from a system that is telling you as clearly as it can that it cannot get back to balance without help. The question is not whether those signals are real. They are real. The question is what kind of help the body actually needs, and the answer is not what most conventional approaches provide. Everything we've been taught about dealing with bad breath and oral bacteria is built on a single premise: bacteria bad, kill bacteria. It's a premise so deeply embedded in the marketing of oral hygiene products that it's almost invisible. Walk down the dental care aisle of any pharmacy and read the front of every bottle. Kills 99.9% of germs. Antibacterial protection. Fights bacteria for 12 hours. The message is consistent. Bacteria are the enemy, and the goal is maximum bacterial elimination. But if you've understood anything from this conversation so far, you've understood that this premise is fundamentally flawed. Bacteria are not the enemy. The wrong bacteria in the wrong proportions are the problem. And the solution to a problem of proportions is not elimination. It's correction. Think of it this way. Imagine a garden that has been overrun by weeds. The weeds are crowding out the flowers and the vegetables, taking the sunlight and the water and the nutrients. What's the right solution? You could pour herbicide over the entire garden, kill everything, weeds and flowers and vegetables alike, and then stand back and wait. Some of what grows back will be flowers, but weeds are hardier, faster growing, and better adapted to disturbed soil. In a short time, you'll have more weeds than before and fewer flowers, or you could remove the weeds selectively, and then, and this is the critical step, you could replant. You could introduce new seeds and seedlings of exactly the plants you want to thrive. You could amend the soil to favor their growth. You could create the conditions in which the desired plants can outcompete the weeds over time, not through aggression, but through the restoration of a healthy, balanced ecosystem. Your oral microbiome is that garden. The anaerobic odor-producing bacteria are the weeds. The beneficial bacteria, the ones that regulate pH, neutralize VSCs, maintain healthy gum tissue, and create an oxygen-rich environment inhospitable to the bad actors, are the flowers and vegetables. And the job is not to kill everything. The job is to reintroduce, repopulate, and restore. This is the principle behind oral probiotic therapy, and it represents a genuine paradigm shift in how we approach not just bad breath, but oral health as a whole. The research on oral probiotics is not new, but it is accelerating rapidly. Over the past 2 decades, a growing body of clinical literature has examined what happens when specific beneficial bacterial strains are deliberately introduced into a compromised oral environment. The results are consistent enough across enough studies to be more than promising. They represent a genuine evidence base for a new approach. The most well-studied beneficial oral bacteria are strains of Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus salivarius, and Streptococcus salivarius. These are not foreign organisms. They are species that have co-evolved with the human oral environment over hundreds of thousands of years. They are species that belong there, that the oral ecosystem is designed to support, and that perform specific measurable functions when present in sufficient numbers. Streptococcus salivarius K12, for example, one of the most extensively studied oral probiotic strains, produces compounds called salivaricins that directly inhibit the growth of the anaerobic bacteria responsible for VSC production. It doesn't kill them indiscriminately, it competitively displaces them. When K12 is present in sufficient numbers, it physically occupies the surface territory on the tongue, the gums, and the oral tissues that the harmful bacteria would otherwise colonize. It produces chemical signals that suppress the growth of its competitors. It alters the local environment in ways that favor the beneficial species and disadvantage the harmful ones. This is what restoration looks like at the microscopic level, not a chemical bombing that destroys everything equally, but a careful, targeted repopulation that gradually shifts the balance back toward health. The clinical outcomes associated with consistent oral probiotic use are measurable and meaningful. Studies have shown reductions in VSC levels, the direct chemical cause of bad breath, of 60 to 80% in subjects with chronic halitosis over periods of 4 to 8 weeks of consistent probiotic use. Parallel reductions in gum inflammation markers, reductions in bleeding on probing in subjects with mild to moderate gum disease, and improvements in patient-reported quality of life measures, particularly around social confidence and anxiety related to breath, have been documented across multiple controlled trials. These are not miracle results. They are the predictable outcomes of restoring balance to a system that was designed to function in balance. When the right bacteria are present in the right numbers, the system does what it was designed to do. The VSC levels drop because the bacteria producing them are being outcompeted. The inflammation decreases because the immune system is no longer dealing with the same level of pathogenic bacterial load. The tissue health improves because the environment has become less hostile and more conducive to normal cellular function. And the breath changes, not because you've covered it with a stronger mask, but because you've addressed the actual source. I want to be very clear about something because this conversation could easily veer into overpromising, and that's not my intention. Restoring the oral microbiome is a process, not an event. It takes time, it takes consistency, and it works best when understood as part of a broader shift in how you relate to your oral health. Not as a daily battle to be won, but as an ecosystem to be tended. The good news is that the process, once you understand it, is not complicated. It's not expensive. It doesn't require dramatic lifestyle changes or intensive interventions. It requires the right tools, used consistently, over sufficient time. The first element is reducing the behaviors that actively disrupt the beneficial bacterial population. This doesn't mean abandoning brushing and flossing. It means reconsidering the role of antibacterial mouthwash as a daily staple. The research suggests that alcohol-based antibacterial mouthwash used daily disrupts the oral microbiome in ways that make recolonization by beneficial bacteria significantly harder. Reducing frequency or replacing it with a more microbiome-friendly alternative, such as a mild saline rinse or a product specifically formulated to be microbiome compatible, creates space for the restoration process to take hold. The second element is hydration. Saliva is, in many ways, the medium through which the oral microbiome is regulated. It carries minerals, antimicrobial peptides, and the very bacteria that populate the ecosystem. Chronic dehydration reduces saliva production, which concentrates bacterial populations, reduces the natural cleansing and regulating functions of saliva, and creates drier, more anaerobic conditions in the posterior regions of the mouth and the throat. Even moderate increases in water consumption, consistently maintained, can meaningfully alter the oral environment in ways that favor the beneficial bacteria. The third element, and this is the central one, is the deliberate introduction of beneficial bacterial strains through oral probiotics. This is the restoration step. This is the replanting. Oral probiotics are available in several formats, the most effective of which are lozenges or tablets that dissolve slowly in the mouth, allowing the bacterial strains to make direct contact with the oral tissues and establish colonization. Swallowed probiotics, by contrast, deliver most of their benefit to the gut. The oral exposure is brief and insufficient for meaningful oral colonization. The fourth element is patience and perspective. The oral microbiome, like any ecosystem, does not shift overnight. The first 2 to 3 weeks of consistent oral probiotic use are typically characterized by subtle changes: a slight improvement in morning breath duration, a reduction in the intensity of the metallic or bitter taste, a sense that the gum tissue feels less inflamed. By weeks 4 through 8, the changes become more pronounced and more consistent. By week 12, most people with moderate to severe oral dysbiosis have experienced clinically meaningful improvements across multiple symptom domains. The experience of that progression, of feeling the system gradually return to a more natural state, is not just physically positive, it's psychologically significant, because when the breath improves, the confidence comes back. And when the confidence comes back, the behavior changes that you'd built around managing the problem start to dissolve. You stop holding back in conversations. You stop doing the mental math of how close you're standing to someone. You stop carrying gum like a security blanket. You start engaging more fully, more openly, more naturally. That's what the restoration of oral balance ultimately gives you. Not just a different reading on a breath meter, a different relationship with yourself and with the people around you. If this is the moment where you recognize that what you've been doing hasn't been enough, that the problem you've been managing actually has a solution you haven't tried yet, the guide in the first link in the description and in the pinned comment below this video lays out the specific approach in detail. It's designed for people dealing with persistent bad breath, sensitive or inflamed gums, and the social and emotional weight that comes with those experiences. It explains not just what to do, but why it works, in the same way we've been talking today. The link is right there. I want to spend a moment on something that isn't often discussed in conversations about oral health, because it feels too personal, too soft, too unscientific for the clinical context in which most of this information gets presented. But I think it's actually the most important thing I can say. Living with a chronic oral health problem, one that affects your breath, your confidence, your social ease, is an experience that quietly reshapes who you are over time. Not dramatically, not in ways that are easy to articulate, but in the small daily accumulations of self-consciousness and held back words and distanced interactions. The experience carves channels in your sense of self that feel, after a while, like just the way things are. And when those channels start to fill back in, when the problem that created them begins to genuinely resolve, the experience is not just relief, it is recognition. Recognition of how much space the problem had been occupying in your daily life. Recognition of how many small adjustments you had built into your routines and your interactions. Recognition of how much easier it is to be fully present with another person when you're not simultaneously monitoring your own breath and managing the anxiety that comes with it. I've seen this described by people who have gone through genuine oral microbiome restoration, and the language they use is remarkably consistent. Words like lighter, more myself, like something I'd accepted as just part of me was actually fixable all along. There's a particular kind of surprise that comes with discovering that something you'd quietly given up on is actually solvable, and a particular kind of joy that follows. Your body is not working against you. It never was. It was doing exactly what it is designed to do. Sending signals, maintaining the best balance it could, trying to communicate that something was wrong and waiting for the right kind of help. The signals were there. The message was clear even if the meaning wasn't. And now that the meaning is clearer, the path forward is clearer too. The body knows how to heal. It knows how to return to balance. It knows how to support health when it's given the right environment and the right tools. What it cannot do, what no body can do, is restore what has been depleted without help replacing it. That's not a failure. That's just biology. And understanding that distinction between a body that is failing and a body that is asking for something specific changes everything about how you approach the problem. Here's where I want to leave you. What you've understood today is not complicated. In fact, in hindsight, it's almost obvious. Of course, a biological ecosystem needs to be balanced, not just cleaned. Of course, a problem rooted in microbial imbalance requires a microbial solution, not just a mechanical or chemical one. Of course, the body's signals are pointing toward a real, solvable cause rather than an inexplicable mystery, but obvious in hindsight is not the same as obvious in the moment, especially when the conventional approach to oral hygiene has been so consistently framed around elimination that almost nobody steps back to ask whether elimination is the right goal at all. The dominant narrative about mouth bacteria has been so loud, so well-funded, and so omnipresent in our daily advertising environment that questioning it feels almost radical. But the evidence for a different approach is real and growing and increasingly hard to ignore. The shift from fighting to restoring, from eliminating to repopulating, from managing symptoms to addressing the underlying cause. This shift is not just intellectually satisfying, it produces different results. And for anyone who has been on the managing symptom side of this for any length of time, the possibility of different results is not small. It is enormous. The path forward is not about radical change. It is not about expensive treatments or complex protocols or dramatic interventions. It is about understanding what the body actually needs and providing it consistently, patiently, and with the knowledge that the system is designed to respond, that it wants to return to balance, that given the right conditions and the right inputs, it knows exactly what to do. And when it does, when you start to notice the morning breath clearing faster, the taste normalizing, the gum tissue calming, the confidence returning, I want you to remember this conversation, not because of anything I said, but because of something you understood, that the body is not your adversary, that the problem was never permanent, that balance, once lost, can be rebuilt. That's the message worth holding on to. That's the discovery worth making. We've covered a lot of ground today. We started with that quiet, familiar frustration, the feeling of doing everything right and still feeling like something is wrong. We moved through the biology of the oral ecosystem, the progressive stages of imbalance, the ways the problem extends beyond the mouth and into the body and the social self. We looked at why the standard approach fails and what the evidence points to instead. And we ended here with a clearer picture of what is actually happening and what restoring balance actually looks like. None of this is about a miracle. None of it is about magic or shortcuts or overnight transformation. It's about understanding a system well enough to support it the way it needs to be supported, and then having the patience to watch that support produce results over time. If anything in this conversation resonated, if you recognized yourself in any of the stages, in any of the symptoms, in any of the quiet social adjustments that have become so automatic you barely notice them anymore, then the guide in the first link in the description and in the pinned comment is worth your time. It takes the framework we've built today and makes it practical and specific. It gives you not just the why, but the what and the how. And it's there for whenever you're ready. Thank you for being here, for taking the time to understand something that most people never take the time to understand. And for being the kind of person who, when something keeps not working, doesn't just accept it, but goes looking for the reason why. That instinct, that refusal to normalize dysfunction, is exactly what leads people to real answers. Take care of your ecosystem. It's the only one you have.